Okay, my name's Terry Campbell and I am the Weekly Voice, and you are watching this on the ChristianReporterNews.com. Now this segment we're going to be talking about the broken United States government budget. Now this is from an article I wrote a few years ago. There's a couple places in it that's dated, but it is still very valid as of today. So let me start here. See, everything I see and hear, they're talking about how to do a budget. They're saying do a cut here, budget cuts. They just doesn't make sense to me, because none of it is the correct way to devise a realistic budget in a free market republic form of government in this country. I just don't want to hear budget cuts anymore. What you really need to do is, okay, how do you derive a budget? Let's just think about it a minute. Let's look at in your home. The first thing you do, you have to pay the necessities, the real needs. And all of the wants you save up for, or you do at a later time. But now what the problem is with our federal government, they have lost track of what are real needs and what is just wishful thinking, blue sky wants. Now, the problem is when you get down to who really defines what the real needs are. Now, usually this process starts with the president, with the executive branch, submitting a budget to Congress. And now he is submitting what he thinks are needs and wants. But of course they're all mixed up. And then Congress takes a look at it, and then they either buy it or they don't buy it. They will go through and they will tweak it and add their own needs and their own wants, and then they will send it back to the president, and he'll either agree and sign it, or he'll veto it and send it back to the House and start the process all over again. Well, this seems like it'd be a fairly easy thing to do. But think about it a minute. We're talking about trillions of dollars, the budget, and we're talking about dozens of different departments and hundreds of agencies. Okay, now, they are all, probably 90%, well more than that, 98% of the money spent in this country is spent by the executive branch of government. Congress goes through and says, okay, here is the funds that are allocated. Okay, now it's up to the executive branch to stay within the bounds of what's funded. Now the problem is the executive branch has been spending more money than has been authorized. Therefore we have gone into deficit spending, and no one has been shutting them down. Now, one of the biggest problems is the most monstrous problem to overcome is the addiction to government handouts. Now, this horrible addiction, it's actually worse than a drug habit. And ever since the progressive movement started with Woodrow Wilson back in 1913, it's been gradually becoming worse and worse. And it has actually got to the point that people were dependent on the federal government to solve their problems, and as a result they have basically lost all of their integrity. I mean, they've just lost their will to stand up and be on their own. Okay, let's start by just simply examining, well, there's simply put, they're spending too much money, and they're spending monies that we do not have on programs that are just not necessary. We must fund our commitments and our needs first, and then prioritize the funding of the wants, okay, if there's any money left over after we do our needs. Now let's start by simply, well, you got to do something else first. You have to get rid of all of the redundancies in the federal government. I mean, like, here's one example of a redundancy. There is 15 different agencies overseeing food safety. Now, there should only be one. Why do you have 15? Well, not only that, there is more than 20 programs intended to help the homeless. And there is over 80 programs for economic development. Now, this is just ridiculous. Now, the GAO, the government, the GAO, Government Accounting Office, that's who it is. They estimated that in the year 2010 alone, this redundancy cost us around $200 billion just in that 1 year. Now, we've got to get rid of all of these redundancies. Now, one of the problems is we've got all of their overlapping responsibilities, and now, to make things even worse, they've implemented all of these czars. Now, who is in charge of doing this? Is it the cabinet level agencies, or is it the czars that only report directly to the president? The areas of responsibility has been totally blurred. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure if the czars are constitutional or not. I haven't found anywhere in the Constitution that it says to appoint a czar to report only to the president. That just, no. Okay, now, there's several things that has to be paid right up front. Okay, number one, you have to pay Social Security. Now, Social Security is something that people have paid into their entire life, and now they're drawing out on it. Now, what happened there is Lyndon Baines Johnson, back in his administration, in his ultimate wisdom, took the Medicare out of a separate account and moved it into the general account of Congress, so the politicians could get their sticky little fingers on it, and they did. And right now, in the Treasury, which is in the account for the Social Security, there is a bunch of IOUs in there that amount to over $2.6 trillion with a T, trillion dollars. Now, this is just not acceptable. Now, we look at Medicare is in as bad, if not worse shape. And then if you look at Medicaid, it's a totally different story. I'm not even going to get into it. Now, the other major commitment, we must pay the interest on our $16 trillion national debt. Now, though, that you have to pay. So if you look at that, so you've got three major things that are things that you just have to pay. And then we've got to stop the destruction of the best healthcare system in the world. 1/6 of the economy of the United States is the health industry. And now this 2,700-page monstrosity that has generated over 16,000 pages of IRS regulations. Now, no one can even figure out how to implement this silly thing. Not only that, but in it they have cut $523 billion out of the Medicare fund. Now, if you go a step further, they also authorized an additional 11,000 new positions within the IRS. And they've also embedded $103 billion of spending, and this has to be eliminated. I mean, this was not a funding bill. Therefore, it's illegal to hide funding in the bill. Therefore, the whole thing should be thrown out. And now we've got to eliminate all of the TARP programs. I mean, these were just throwing away trillions of dollars to bail out too big to fail banks and insurance companies, real estate, auto, industries. So that's got to stop. We got to stop subsidizing mainly all of the green jobs. I mean, let's face it, Solyndra and all. I mean, the federal government has to stop picking and choosing winners and losers. I mean, this is just doesn't make sense. If a business cannot stand on its own, it should fail. That's how our free market system works. Now, here's a good example of this. Let's take a look at ethanol. Now, it takes 1.5 times more energy to produce a gallon of ethanol than there is energy in that gallon of ethanol. Now, if this is a total asinine program, if I ever saw one. Not only that, it increases the price of transportation and your food. And if it ever gets over 10% ethanol in your gasoline, it'll start burning the valves out of your car because it's not designed, because it'll run too hot and it'll destroy your engine. So, I mean, it is just a bad thing all the way around. Now, let's... basically, the general size of government is just way too large. We need to cut down. Well, see, in June of 2010, the number of the number of government employees, people who work for the government at all levels, the number of government employees surpassed the number of people working in private industry. Now that is a slippery slope, well on our way to becoming a socialist nanny state, where you're depending on the government for everything. Now, I've got a whole bunch of things here. I'm just going to skip over. Basically, if you want to get the rest of this, you're going to have to read the article, because there's way too much here to cover in the minute I've got left. Okay, so I'm going to jump right down to the conclusion. Okay, now, well, I'm going to go back up a little above the conclusion. Now let's have a look at the wishful thinking wants. Here I'm going to just present an incomplete list of spending that should be considered to eliminate or greatly reduce. NPR, PBS, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, NEA, EPA, FDA, IRS, Medicaid, welfare, the Energy Department, Department of Education, the Federal Reserve Bank. I mean, control of our money should be in Congress, not a private, uncountable company. I mean, that's just not right. And all special interest, so-called earmarks, and anything that costs money and is not absolutely necessary to run the government should be eliminated. In conclusion, here is a short list, a very short summary here. First, eliminate all the redundancies, drastically reduce the size of government, fund our commitments, fund our real needs, and if there is any money left over, then start prioritizing what's to be funded, but at a much reduced rate. Now, in closing, for heaven's sakes, when putting a budget together, please use a little bit of common sense. Yeah, I didn't know. Imagine imagine finding someone in Washington, D.C., a politician that has any common sense. Well, this is Terry Campbell, and God bless America, and good night.